Hi everyone! So now I'm going to take you on a tour in the roastery, so come along and I'll show you what goes on during production here. Let me just switch on the lights. And here we go! This is where the magic happens. This is where the roasting and the production happens for Tiong Hoe Specialty Cafe. You actually see two different roasters here, but we don't actually use both of them. This is a 70-year-old roaster that we actually used to use, but right now we are actually working on getting it hooked up to a computer. So electronics-wise, we are not using that. We are actually using this one. This is actually what we call a drum roaster, in which case there's actually a heat source, and we are using a gas flame heat source here. So there's actually a drum within it that will be actually rotating while you're actually roasting. So we actually measure the temperature of the beans through this probe here. And we also measure the exhaust temperature through this part. So this is where we load the raw beans. Once we are ready, we actually open the lever and the beans will drop through into the roaster here, during which it will actually be constantly turning. The revolutions per minute that it actually turns, that is also important, and that's something that can be tweaked also nowadays, because the amount of time it gets in touch with the roaster drum surface will affect how the bean is actually roasted also. So what we do is, during the roasting, this door is actually closed and you can actually see the beans being roasted through this window here. Alternatively, if you can't see, this is what we call a probe also, and you can actually scoop out certain beans to see and watch the progress of the bean. So this is a cooling tray actually. So this cooling tray, when it's on, will actually have a fan that cools the beans, and this part here would be the mixer that actually mixes the beans and makes sure that once it's dropped out, it's constantly being mixed and being cooled. And we want the cooling to happen as fast as possible so that the bean doesn't continue to roast with the remnant heat that is inside. Because towards the end, it actually can get quite hot, like 200 over degrees Celsius. So if you don't cool it fast enough, the bean continues to roast and get darker with the remnant heat energy. And once the bean is actually cooled and done, we also go through a picking process where we pick out maybe unripe beans, Quaker, some defects in the beans itself. And once that's done, we actually release the beans through this lever here. And for the smaller batches of coffee, we actually have a smaller roaster over here. This is a Taiwanese roaster. This one would be for the more premium beans where we don't actually roast such big batches of. So this one would be a 1 kilo roaster. And same thing, there's a lot of wires that we can actually use to hook up to the computer for this. Next, we go on to the packing machine. So for the packing machine, you actually see a very big hopper at the top here. So this one we can actually usually put in maybe about 10 to even 15 kg of beans. Once up there, there's actually two different vibrating, what we call channels. So we can actually tweak the channeling so that it doesn't vibrate as fast or vibrate faster, so that the actually exact weight will actually be measured pretty precisely, and finally it will be weighed in this chamber here. So once this chamber hits the exact weight that we want, it will actually stop vibrating and stop functioning. Then we just actually press a lever and this will actually release the beans into our packaging. And finally, we reach the sealing part. This will actually be our sealing machine that we use. Usually it actually goes on an automatic belt here, so what I do is just put the bag in and it actually automatically seals up the bag. Yeah, so that is actually what we do in production. So for the first part of the cafe tour, we actually have the bean display that we have here. So all the beans that we have roasted just now in the production will actually be displayed on the shelves over here. And if customers actually want to get the beans, we actually will be able to grind it for them in the grinder that's right behind over here. So this is our trusty workhorse grinder. This is actually what we use to grind when customers actually want their beans ground. And over here we have a casher, and yes, Glenn here is actually brewing a pour over. So this will be actually our pour over brew bar. So customers can actually get to select all the various beans, and this will be where we store all the beans for our brew bar. And over here we actually have our espresso machine. So any espresso orders like latte, cappuccino is all done over here. For this part, it's actually where we scoop all the raw beans for our production, and you realize that there's all sorts of different colors and sacks from different origins. So just a fun tip, there are certain origins with actually very iconic bags. For example, we have the Papua New Guinea here. So I would say this Birds of Paradise design is actually quite iconic to Papua New Guinea beans. And for example, Brazil tends to have this kind of a picture on it. Yeah. So you realize that different origins, they actually have different packing, I would say, habits in that sense. Some actually come in this, is what we call grain pro bags. So these bags actually help to keep the raw beans fresh in a more food grade safe environment, whereas some actually don't come with the grain pro bag. It depends on the origin itself and what they have access to when they're packing the beans. And some of the more premium beans, they actually tend to come in small little airtight plastic packaging as well. So we actually have beans from Colombia, Ethiopia, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, basically quite a lot of places on the coffee belt, as much as we can find actually, to try and offer a greater variety to to everyone's preferences. So after the raw beans here, you can actually have a look at the shelves up there. So this is actually some of the collection that Uncle Tan Tiong Hoe has collected in his years of coffee making. And you'll see a variety of scales and grinders at the top there. So right at the corner, there's actually quite an iconic Kalita red kettle as well. And on the second shelf, you have quite a lot of the coffee pots that is similar to what we used in the first part, where we actually did the traditional coffee brewing. And then you have some of the more like Turkish kind of kettle as well as the very traditional kopitiam coffee cups over there. On this corner, we also have a kind of a traditional grinder. So this used to be a grinder back in the day. So you actually just put it in at the top and then just turn the wheel. It's very, very heavy. So we had to mount it up there. This calligraphy is actually written by one of Uncle Tan's old friends. He's called Chen, so he was quite well known for his calligraphy skills. So this is actually a poem that he's written on the side of this, which is the traditional cafe coffee word. So this poem is actually talking about his feelings when he's actually having a cup of coffee and what he thinks that people are feeling when they have a cup of coffee in a cafe. So basically this poem actually talks about how coffee brings people together, and at the same time, at the end of a coffee drinking session, people actually just go their own separate ways again. So it's about how coffee actually brings people together. And because it's so iconic, we actually use it on our takeaway cups as well.